Okay, so it is recording. Excellent. Hello, everyone. Hope you're doing very, very well. This is our third session on teaching foreign languages, session number 3. Most of you are watching this recorded, obviously, so welcome back. And obviously, we have some people who are here live as well. For the people who would like to participate live, I'll put a link, as usual, in the YouTube description below, or wherever else makes sense, depending on where you're watching this. So you can attend live if you would like to. As of right now, the schedule is on Tuesdays at 8:30 p.m. Calgary time, where I live in Canada. Obviously, the schedule might change depending on when you're watching this. If you're watching this 4 months from now, maybe these aren't even running anymore, and there isn't the option to sign up anymore. Who knows? But as I'm recording this today, this is basically every single Tuesday. Okay. So the plan for today, so the agenda that we have, we're going to do a very, very quick about me, because I just noticed in the live people that are watching this, there's some people that are here for the first time. So we'll do very, very quickly. Won't spend a lot of time on it. I want to talk about, let's go back a slide. I want to talk about this rough level assessment. So we're going to talk about kind of what the purpose is, the 4 steps to doing a rough level assessment, and then at the end, there's going to be a question and answer and discussion portion, which for the people watching live, people watching the recorded version, excuse me, will not be able to watch because it won't be recorded. So very quick about me. So I'm from Calgary, Canada. I love learning languages. I speak 5 languages currently: English, French, Spanish, Mandarin, Gujarati. Those are the 5. I would like to learn some more in the years to come. I graduated from university 6 years ago, or yeah, 6 years ago. It has been 6 years. It was in 2014. I did a double major in French and Spanish. Nowadays, I run a business called the Calgary Language Nerds. So we teach various foreign languages. We teach English, French, Spanish, Mandarin. We're starting up some Italian in the fall, German, lots of different languages, Gujarati, plenty of languages. And I really, really like teaching, and it's really fun to run this business. It's really cool to work with the teachers that work at the Calgary Language Nerds, to work with them, work with the, work I personally teach as well. And it's a really big passion of mine. So these sessions here, they're kind of a dual purpose. A, I like talking about teaching and sharing my experiences from teaching. That's always fun for me. And I've wanted to do it for a while. But B, it's actually, I also use it for internal training purposes for teachers that work at the Calgary Language Nerds. So it's a bit of a dual purpose that there's a dual purpose behind these videos. And yeah, there's just a very, very fast introduction on me. I think most of you know who I am at this point. So there's just a couple people today that are here for the first time watching this live. Okay, so let's start here. Purpose. So the purpose of this rough language assessment, the rough level assessment, excuse me, is to essentially identify a starting point for the class. To be clear, this is not a formal language assessment in the sense of you're testing their reading, you're testing their writing, you're testing their speaking, you're testing their listening. It's not a formal language assessment. That's not what this is. This is a rough language assessment to get an idea of what does this student know? Where are they roughly speaking, approximately, with their level? And that way you know that, okay, this is the stuff they know right now, and this is the stuff that we definitely have to work on together. So at Calgary, at the Calgary Language Nerds, when we do it, usually I end up doing that rough level assessment. Usually I end up doing it, but not always, not always. So that's the whole purpose behind this, is figuring out where are we starting and where and where are we going here? What do we have to actually work on? One of my, let's go back here. One of my biggest, not my biggest pet peeves, but one of the things that I think sometimes doesn't make sense when you look at other language classes or other language schools, in my perspective, what doesn't make sense is where you go to the school, they do some form of level assessment, which is great. They identify what level you are and what class you should enter. But when you enter that class, what's interesting to me is that within the class itself, the teacher hasn't actually identified what specific grammar concepts, vocabulary concepts, pronunciation concepts, conversation concepts, etc., what specific concepts you know versus don't know. So literally before recording this, like maybe half an hour before, I was just chatting with my mom, and we were just chatting. My mom's actually a teacher, and she used to take some French classes years ago, and she was telling me how she went for her assessment. She went into the class, and then they literally just started on chapter 1 of the book. They had a book for that class. They went chapter by chapter, which is fine, by the way, not really a problem. My, I suppose, critique is that within that class, the class was not made based on, how do I explain this? They did not check, okay, we're on chapter 1. Do we need to cover chapter 1? If everybody knows chapter 1, why are we covering chapter 1, right? Or if we're on chapter 1 of this book, but then you realize, wait a second, people still struggled with chapter 4 of the previous book. We can't really do chapter 1 yet. So the purpose of this rough language assessment, or level assessment, rough level assessment, is to figure out, okay, what are we working on? What do they need to know? And where are we trying to go here? So let's break down the steps. The first step is super easy. You're going to ask the student or students about their previous experiences with the foreign language. So this does not take very long. Usually the way I do it is I'll just ask them, hey, what previous experience do you have with French or with Spanish or Japanese or Mandarin or whatever language? What previous experience do you have? And they might say any number of things. This is an important question because the way they answer immediately gives you an indication as to where you'll likely have to start. If someone says to you, let's give some examples. Someone says, oh, I've never studied language. Never. I'm trying to learn Spanish. I don't know a word. All I know is hola. All I know is how to say hola. Well, all of a sudden, number one, you hear people who speak Spanish hear the thick accent in my word hola. You immediately know, okay, they know nothing about pronunciation because they said hola and not hola. So they immediately know, okay, they don't know about pronunciation. They don't know that H's are silent because hola is not, in Spanish, you don't say that. H's are silent. So you immediately notice that. You immediately notice, okay, they know nothing about Spanish. And you actually you immediately don't have to follow the rest of the steps. You now know where they're at. Step 1, boom, problem solved. You know exactly where they're at. They know nothing. And you can literally ignore the remainder of these steps. It might be the other side of the equation. They might be like, oh yeah, I actually did a whole French major or a Spanish major, or I did a major in it and I graduated in 2010. And I've noticed I'm just, now we're in 2020 and I've noticed my levels kind of slipping, and I wanted to do something about that. Well, you immediately know they're probably reasonably strong. If they did a French major in university, they probably have a reasonably strong level of French, most likely. And you're like, okay, you're not even, when you do your assessment, which we're going to look at in a moment, you're not going to be checking their alphabet knowledge, most likely, right? You're probably going to make an assumption immediately, okay, they have some basis already, and they're not complete beginners. So this gives you a great starting point, a very good starting point of roughly where they're at. Step 2, we're going to pick an assessment approach. Now, I've listed 2 different approaches here for assessments. There's a conversational approach, and there's more of a direct approach. The conversational approach is best for people who are not super nervous. So, and to be specific, it's best for students who are not nervous. Not you as the teacher, but the student is not nervous. They seem quite comfortable. So you have to kind of watch their body language to see, are they nervous or are they not nervous? And also it's good for people who already have a little bit of a base level in the language. So people who might already have an intermediate level, who can already have a little bit of conversation, who already know something. And then direct approach is best for people who are nervous, and then people who are more on the beginner side of things. If they are a pure beginner, as in they know nothing, well, as I said before, we're not even going to get to step 2. If they know nothing, we already know, we literally stop on step 1, and there's no need to even do any kind of assessment. You know they know 0, which is great. But if they're beginner and they know a little bit, but not a lot, and you're trying to figure out how much do you actually know, what little bit do you know, it's probably best to follow a direct approach. And I'm going to explain what these approaches mean. So a conversational approach is where you're going to ask them questions to check their knowledge. You're essentially going to have a conversation. In the next slide, I'm going to explain what kinds of questions to ask and how to approach that conversation. But that's what the conversational approach is. You're going to have a conversation, and while you're having that conversation, you're taking notes and you're listening actively, and you're paying attention to see what grammar concepts don't they know, what grammar concepts do they know, what pronunciation concepts do they know, what pronunciation concepts do they not know, what kinds of vocabulary are they using, what are they not using, what kinds of errors are they making, etc. You're paying attention to see, okay, what do they know, what do they not know. And then a direct approach is a little bit different. Again, best for nervous people, also for beginners, where you ask them direct questions. I usually start with, do you know, and I'll insert some phrase. For example, do you know your greetings in Spanish? Have you seen or heard greetings in Spanish before? Let's say the person says, oh, yeah, I think I've seen some greetings, right? Now we'll pass on to phase 2. Oh, okay. So like, how would you say like hi? Do you know the word for hi? Oh, yeah, isn't hi like hola? Yeah, very good. Hola, excellent. Okay, what other greetings do you know? Do you know, for example, how would you say like good morning? And they're like, oh, that's like that buenos noches, right? That's how you say good morning, right? Buenos noches. Almost. It's actually buenos dias. Here's how you write it. Oh, okay, great. Okay, let's see. What other greetings do we have? And you start to ask, do you know this? Or have you seen this? Depends on the context. Then you'll start asking, how do you say this? Right? And you're basically asking questions to test if they really know it. Because some people, funnily enough, they'll be like, hey, do you know the present tense? Have you seen that before? And they're like, oh yeah, I know that. Yeah, that's amazing. That's like so easy. And you're like, oh great, they know it. It's so crazy how many people say they know something and they actually don't know it. It's crazy. it's really crazy how people are like, I know this, but they actually don't when you actually ask them questions to see. So like, okay, they know the present tense. Oh great, so you study, that's fantastic. So let's start to look at some here. It's like, how would I, maybe give me a sentence in the present tense, anything you want. How would you say something? Like, can you give me an example? And they might be like, oh yeah. And then off they go. And you're gonna ask them questions to see if they really know it. And so this direct approach can work, again, as I said, for nervous people or for very, very beginners. It can go either way, tends to be better. So people often wonder, what do I ask and what do I ask? So I've made a list here. Now the first and most important thing is I've written it right up top. It depends on the language, because every language will have different points that matter. So I'll give you an example. I speak Mandarin. In Mandarin, if we look at this list of things here, we're not gonna we're not gonna spend much time on gender, number, and articles, because Mandarin doesn't have those, right? Mandarin, or even French and Spanish. I speak French and Spanish. There are no cases in French and Spanish, right? If we go back to Mandarin, like the alphabet, it's not what you would imagine the alphabet in Mandarin. There is a pronunciation-based alphabet, but it's not a traditional alphabet because it's a character-based language. So that might not be exactly where I start. But what I've done is I've made a general guideline, and then it's going to depend on the language, and it's not a hard and fast rule per se. And actually, going a step back, for Mandarin, I still would start with alphabet, but I'd probably label it more pronunciation than I would alphabet. So here is the list that I've made, and in order. So first is the alphabet / pronunciation. I like to start with that. So I usually will be paying attention to alphabet pronunciation. So I might actually test it, or rather ask about it. So if we go back a slide, if we're looking at a direct approach, I might say, do you know the alphabet? Do you know the pronunciation of the language? Are you aware of how the sounds work? And then take it from there. If you're taking a conversational approach and someone, funnily enough, sometimes people really have a reasonably strong level, but their overall, their overall pronunciation knowledge is really poor. Like they have very poor pronunciation and understanding of how the sounds of that language work. So I'm still paying attention to that alphabet / pronunciation. In fact, I'm even going to write pronunciation right in here. Pronunciation. Oops. Annoying. I don't like that it's going on different lines. There we go. Alphabet pronunciation. Just add it in. So I'm paying attention to that because that's immediately going to indicate, we need to work on that at some point in our classes because he or she is lacking in that skill set. I'll then go into survival phrases. So these are usually what you find in a tourist phrase book. Hello, goodbye, please, can you help me? What's your name? My name is. How old are you? Where is this thing? How much does this cost? I'll look at some survival phrases that immediately get them going. So I'll test for those. I'll test those and see if they know them. Self-introductions, right? I'll look at simple nouns, verbs, and adjectives. Usually the way I misspelled pronunciation. Did I misspell that? Oh yeah, I did. There we go. Pronunciation. So simple verbs, nouns, and adjectives. Usually the way I do it is I Google. I will literally Google common verbs in Spanish. I will click one of the websites that pops up and we'll look at the list together, right? Hey, do you know this verb? We'll literally go verb by verb. Do you know this? Do you know this? Yes, no, ooh, not familiar with that one. Okay, right? And they might be like, ooh, I've never seen that, never seen that, never seen that, right? Nouns, same things, adjectives, same things. I just literally Google common adjectives in French, common blah, blah, blah in Mandarin. And we just start to go through the list. If we go back a couple slides, if we're taking a conversational approach, I'm just listening and paying attention to what kinds of verbs, nouns, and adjectives are they using? Are they day-to-day? Are they day-to-day ones? Are they using some really complex ones? Are they getting stuck a lot? You're like, okay, there's a gap here. I'll test as well present, past, and future if they're able to actually communicate in all three. So for example, what a lot of people do is they can communicate in present, past, and future, but what they do is they don't do it grammatically correctly. So I'll give you a demo. Let's say I'm speaking in English, and let's say I'm an English learner, and you're asking me, oh, hey, Azren, how was your last week? Last week is the past tense. So I should be answering using the past tense in English, but it's super common for people to say, oh, last week, really, really good. Last week is excellent. Last week, I go to my friend's house. Last week, I eat some very yummy cake. Last week, I see my friend. Last week, and all of a sudden, if you're noticing, I'm conjugating everything in the present, but I'm still talking about the past. Typically, that it's really common for not all Asian languages, but I've noticed that in Vietnamese speakers when I've taught them. I've noticed that with Chinese speakers, Mandarin speakers, Cantonese speakers. That's a very common thing they do. A lot of languages that don't have verb conjugations in the same way that we do in English, they might struggle with this in English, for instance. In French, I see it often as well because of, I don't want to nerd out too much, but I see it in French as well. Yeah, so this is also something I'll test. Cases, so not all languages have cases, but I'll test important cases as well. So as German has cases in it. Gender, number, and article. So again, not all languages have this, but this would be like masculine, feminine, neutral, plurals. Articles are like the, and, like words of that nature, some, right? I'll pay attention to the length of the replies as well. So this is getting, again, from more beginner to more and more advanced. So one thing you'll notice is some people seem to speak really well when you're doing this kind of initial testing. And you're like, man, this person speaks pretty well. Man, they seem quite fluent, actually. Huh, what the heck are we going to work on? Well, think about the length of their replies. Some people come across super fluent, but they only reply in 1 or 2 sentences at a time. You ask a question, they give you a 1 or 2 sentence reply. That's a very clear indication that they're lacking in confidence in their speaking, and they're also lacking vocabulary. Maybe they know it, but to actually use it properly, that's an indication that they're lacking vocabulary, they're lacking confidence, they're lacking maybe the ability to actually formulate thoughts in a more extended fashion. So this is going to now indicate to you, you need to give them formulas to speak. So I'll actually give you one formula right here. For people that struggle to give longer replies, one thing you can immediately do, super effective strategy. In fact, this will even work in your first language. For people, it's a presentation tip. It's not a language learning tip. Anytime you want to give a reply to something and you want to sound intelligent, you have to think of it in groups of 3. Always groups of 3. Now, the groups of 3 can be anything: past, present, future. It could be local, national, international. It could be anything. So if you ask me, hey, Azren, let's give some job interview advice while you're here. This applies for so many things, not just language. So if you're in like a job interview and someone says, well, tell me about yourself, you might go past, present, future. Well, I'm born in blah, 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 and I grew up here, and blah, 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 this happened. And now in my life, in the present moment, I'm working on this. And in the future, I would like to work towards blah, blah, blah. Or, local, national, international. Hey, what are you trying to do? Oh, I don't even know. What would someone ask you? What are you trying to accomplish with your business right now? Well, right now we're a local business and we do blah, 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 blah. Then we're hoping to kind of expand it into a national, and then hopefully we can actually move. And I really have an affinity towards France. I'd love the business to move to France at some point and operate in France too. Again, local, national, international, right? Big, medium, small. So groups of 3 is a great way to help people to increase those length of replies. In fact, you might even write that down yourself in English too, and whatever your mother tongue is. That's just a great formula to sound intelligent. So length of replies. Depth of descriptions is another one. Some people only give surface level descriptions for things. They don't describe things in very deep or detailed ways. So a great exercise to test this depth of descriptions, and even in the class itself to work on depth of descriptions, a great exercise is go on Google, right? Where you can print things as well if it's an in-person class, and bring a picture of a problem: a broken shower head, a leaky faucet, a house that is, missing a wall, a flood, and then tell them, hey, describe the problem. Ooh, that's really tough. How do I know it's tough? Because it's hard for me in French and Spanish, and I'm really fluent in French and Spanish. I'm super strong in those 2 languages. And when I have to describe problems, it could be something so simple. Literally, like, what's an example? I remember I was doing this exercise with someone, and we had a broken shower head. It was like a shower head that was kind of like detached from the wall. And then my student's like, how would you describe that? And I looked at it going like, I don't know. What would I say? How do I describe that? In English, I know, because I've seen that so many times. But in Spanish, I was like, huh. And I had to really think about it. It was hard for me. So if I'm like super advanced, and it's like, this will be good for all sorts of more intermediate advanced levels. It's a great exercise to push that depth of description. This goes into the next point: technical vocabulary and situations. The more narrow you go within a specific topic, the more you'll encounter things they don't know. So someone might know, for example, the rooms of a house, but the moment you go super detailed into every item in the house, every item, suddenly you realize they only know 75% of things in a house. Or they might know how to say car, but do they know the parts of a car? Probably not. They might know how to say the post office, but do they know how to actually read all the post office different package options? What do they even call it? They call it standard delivery rate. What do they call it? Expedited delivery rate. They have next day shipping, all these different terms. Do you know them? Probably not. You might know how to say, you might know your basic foods, but you can't read a restaurant menu because restaurant menus use a lot of flowery language to describe the dishes. So going more detailed into different situations or vocabulary topics you'll notice, like if you are doing an assessment and you're like, hey, you're noticing they know their foods, and you're like, okay, let's actually look at a menu. Let's see if we can understand a menu. And they're like, whoa, and all of a sudden they can't understand a menu because there's a lot of words they don't know, right? You can start to see. I just realized I wrote more technical vocabulary twice. I just realized that. There's a typo there. So that's in there twice. So we can ignore that. Hypothetical situations are always really, really tough. That's where you're getting into some more really advanced levels. So hypothetical situations are always harder to talk about than concrete situations. I don't care what language. I'll give you an example. It's easy to say, I want to go to France. It's easy to say, or easier to say, I went to France. It's easy to say, I used to go to France. But what's much more difficult for people to say is, if I had gone to France last year, I would have seen my best friend. If I had done this, then blah, blah, blah would have happened. Oh, if tomorrow, I don't know, a lot of these if questions that are hypothetical, those get really tough. Those get really hard in a variety of languages. And so that's some really advanced things to look at. And then any complex grammar might be another thing you look at as well. So again, this is not a comprehensive guideline, but it's definitely a great starting point. The reality is most people get stuck literally in this first column of stuff. Most people kind of get, there's something in here. Once you start to get into this present, past, and future, you immediately start to get people that don't know. And once you're in the second column here, like that's where most people are not going to get past the second column here anyway. Not most. So, and one day I'll do a session on teaching advanced students, because teaching very advanced students is a completely different skill set. It's so different than teaching intermediates and beginners. It's so wildly different. And that's why a lot of it, if you ever talk to advanced students of a language, they struggle with classes because a lot of teachers are not equipped. In fact, even me, I'll be honest with you, I'm stronger at teaching beginners and intermediates. I'm good at teaching advanced, but I think if you give me if you talk to me in like 2 years, and I'm trying to always work on my teaching skills. If you talk to me in 2 years, I think I'd look back at myself today and be like, yeah, I'm way better at those advanced students now. I know. And I know that because when I look at myself from 2 years ago teaching, I'm like, yeah, I'm way better at teaching advanced people now than I used to be. So a really useful resource for these assessments is called a CEF. You'll have to Google this. If you literally Google CEFR self-assessment, it's going to be the first. In fact, I think it's called a self-assessment grid. Let me actually check on Google right now. I believe it's self-assessment grid. Yes, it is the CEFR self-assessment grid. That's what it's called. Basically what it is a grid. It is it's what it sounds like. It's a self-assessment grid. The purpose of it is actually for students, language learners, to look at this chart, read the chart, which is written in very simple English. In fact, it's available in lots of different languages. So you can even view it if English isn't your first language, you could probably find a language that you speak and read it in that language. And basically, it's very, very simply explained, and you can see where your level is. So it's great for language learners who are trying to figure out roughly what level they're at. It's a quick tool they can use. But I like it as a teaching tool, because what you can do, I'll give you an example. I'm going to open it up right now and just look at it in front of me. So for example, on this grid, it says, I'll read you one of the squares. This is an A1 level. So this is a very beginner level. And someone who has an A1 level, in terms of their speaking interaction, it says, I can interact in a simple way, provided the other person is prepared to repeat or rephrase things at a slower rate of speech and help me formulate what I'm trying to say. I can ask and answer simple questions in areas of immediate need or on very familiar topics. So when you're doing this assessment and you're asking yourself, what the heck? What kinds of questions will I ask? What kinds of topics do I have to test? How do I pick those? Well, you go to your self-assessment grid, you look at the grid, and you start to look at some of the squares on this grid. You'll have to Google it. You can even Google it as you're listening to this and pull it up and look at it with me right now if you would like to. So when I read that to you, that spoken interaction, you can immediately see, oh, it says in there, I can ask and answer simple questions in areas of immediate need. You're like, oh, so they have to be able to ask questions and answer questions. Oh, interesting. So for example, in French, asking questions is a little bit complex in French. It's not that easy to ask questions in French. There's a little bit to it there. It's not that straightforward to ask questions in French. It really isn't. So you're like, oh, I should probably in my assessment include a portion where they have to ask me some questions. That should be part of my assessment because that's what they need for an A1 level. Oh, interesting. Right? Or another one in reading, they have to be able to understand familiar names, words, and very simple sentences. For example, on notices and posters or in catalogs. That's one of the elements I'm reading it right now. You're like, oh, maybe I should find some posters online and see if they could read the posters. That gives you something to incorporate in your assessment. So this is a great resource if you're planning out an assessment to figure out what kinds of questions to ask, what kinds of things do you test, what do I do, right? Because I haven't listed out, I've given you a general framework right here, right, of what to ask and ask some questions, but I understand some people might want something more specific on like, what kinds of questions do I ask? What do I ask if they're beginner? What do I ask if they're intermediate? What do I test them on? So that's this resource, the CEFR self-assessment grid is a great resource for that. So the last step here, and then we'll move into our questions and discussion and cut the recording, is take notes. So you're not going to remember everything that they tell you, that the student tells you. And you are going to want to take notes about students. So you want to write down what are the areas they already know and they're comfortable with? What are areas that they need to improve on? You want to write this down somewhere where you're not going to lose it. You want to make sure you refer to it. You're going to have to refer to it and look at it again in, probably a couple months, two months, 3 months, something like that. Maybe even more often, you might look back and see, because this is going to be this document where you take notes is actually the beginning of your lesson plans. This is the starting point of your lesson plans. This initial rough level assessment. So this is going to be where you refer back to say, oh, we've been working on blah, 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 blah. Man, what should I work on next? Let me look at my rough level assessment to see what we have left to work on. This is literally, I do this usually for me, and that's just, for me, I do it every 2 months, 2 to 3 months. And it could be done less or more frequently, to be honest. For me, it's 2 to 3 months because when I do billing at Calgary Language Nerds, the way we bill our classes is typically 2 or 3 months at a time. So when someone's coming to the end of their classes, well, their curriculum is kind of coming to a close for that 2 months. And so we'll review that. I'll review that to see kind of, what are we working on next? How much progress did they make on the things that they were working on? Because by the way, and this will be a whole separate session on note taking and things of that nature, but you have to be able to measure their progress. You have to be able to see, did they actually improve? Did they actually get better over time? A lot of people go through classes and they don't, even though they studied a lot, they don't actually remember it. They really don't. They don't remember what they learned. They can't actually apply the knowledge that they learned. So they're taking level 5 Japanese, but they're really only at level 2 in terms of what they can actually do, which is why a lot of people end up taking years of classes. And when they actually have to do something simple, like introduce themselves, they can't do it. They just can't do it. So, all right. So we're going to wrap up the recorded portion here. Again, people who watch this recording, you're welcome to join us during the live sessions if you would like to. I'll put a link in the description or wherever, depending on where you're watching this on Instagram. I'll put it somewhere findable for you. So you're able to join if you would like to. And with that aside, let me stop the recording and then we'll jump into our Q&A portion. All right, everybody. See you later. Stop recording.